Hey, folks, it got worse. Somehow, it got even worse. And it's not only that, but the Genshin English VA situation also got a whole lot more confusing. And ironically, it got more confusing because of a video that Risley's English VA, Zoe Zieja, sorry, I pronounced it as Zieja last time, made that was supposed to showcase the facts of the situation, but would only end up exacerbating the main pain points that both I and a lot of people in the community had to begin with. But before we get into my analysis of that video, there's something that I want to briefly talk about because while I'm pretty sure that a lot of you would have liked a deeper conversation on this topic, this video isn't going to focus much on the whole continuation of the chaos surrounding Kaching's VA and Paimon's VA. And really, it's just because I think that it's a bit too drama for me to really talk about. And Hirohei already has an extensive playlist detailing the timeline of it all, so feel free to watch his videos. So instead of talking about it too deeply, I only have two questions that I direct both to you, the general audience, and to the VAs who are involved in that whole debacle in the first place. 1. Kaching's VA mentions that Jacob, Kenichi's new voice actor, has done very little VO work to the point where voice acting doesn't seem to be his main line of work, with the rest of the tweet being a bit too stalkery for me to really talk about. So if she truly believes that, then wouldn't it mean that it would make sense for Jacob to not be familiar with the chaos of another nation's voice acting union and that he would be unfamiliar with the strike itself, just like how he had claimed via Auroron's VA? And 2, this is mainly to Karina, Paimon's VA, who was telling us to not listen to YouTubers because they are all liars who are paid to lie to people, and that if you're not involved in the industries that matter in this situation, then no one should listen to you. Okay, fair enough. But what about now? Your fellow voice actor have made videos to explain the situation. There are SAG members who are doing Reddit clarifications, and another one of your voice actor colleagues have outright mentioned that union voice actors who work on Genshin are being paid union rates. And we've pulled many official information on the strike from SAG's own website, SAG's own rules, and the National Labor Relations Board website. What's supposed to happen now that most of us who are questioning the situation have pulled the information that forms the basis of our understanding, opinions, and conclusions of the situation based on the information that those people and parties who are by all counts of objectivity are reliable sources, or should be reliable sources for this matter, have given to us? Are we supposed to still dismiss all of that information as words perpetrated by liars? Or are we now finally allowed to form our own educated analysis of this situation? You tell me. But evidently, there would be very little care for people of this community to wait for an answer, because whether or not you think it's time, people have already been doing their own study of this case. And this is where Zoe Zieja's video comes into play. And before I say anything else about this video, I just want to say my own thanks to Zoe Zieja himself for having taken the time to make another long-form video to try and clarify the situation. It sure beats just being a VA going around spouting stuff without an inch of constructive or educational material. Unfortunately, that's just about all of the good that I can honestly say about that video, because quite frankly, if you watched my previous video and if you have been looking around at the community's general understanding of the VA situation, then quite frankly, that video will not help you in clarifying any further information. In fact, from my own watch of his video, I ended up finding myself asking even more questions than I do finding any of them being answered. Another small nitpick I may have would probably be to reconsider the thumbnail. Putting Genshin and SAG's logo the way the thumbnail places it makes it look like this is a strike in which Genshin and SAG are collaborating together for, which, really isn't the case. But let me just walk you guys through the pieces of information that he gave and the questions that ends up coming up. Questions that are both from my own thoughts and those that are pulled from the comments of that video. First things first, Joe confirms that VAs are not exactly striking against Hoyoverse, but rather they call it a collective work refusal. For brevity purposes, I'll shorten it to CWR. The lay of it, he confirms what we already know. Hoyo actually has nothing to do with the original SAG strike itself. It's just that the voice actors realized, oh wait, that's what SAG is demanding from their strike? Then we should ask the same thing from the people we are working with. Which, Begs the question, then does Hoyo actually have the right to recast union actors to begin with? Because that's been the understanding so far for all of us, right? Because of US labor laws, companies are prohibited from firing striking employees unless some specific other crap happens. But now that Genshin's status as a non-union project also seemingly exempts it from being involved with union shenanigans, does that mean that Hoyo actually had the right to recast all these actors all along? Mind you, Joe does not address this at all. He simply addresses the question of whether or not Hoyo would recast, but not about whether or not they have the right to, which is really the question we needed an answer to, because by the looks of it, he's making Hoyo look more and more like Saints for having dealt with the AI strike for so long while not replacing most of the voice actors until Kanichi happened, which was well like 6 or 8 months into the strike itself. Alongside the CWR stuff, he also mentions that non-unions makes it difficult for workers of a certain company to take a collective action, but more because it's tough to make it an actual collective effort from the worker's side. It's called the collective action problem, and it's because the division of union and non-unions exists, it makes for a differing set of priorities that can make those two sides clash on what their default goal of the collective action was supposed to be. Joe also then talks about California Law AB 2602, which prohibits companies from making a one-to-one digital replica of actors, actually making it illegal unless the company have specifically stated in their contracts that they are going to do that with your voice, but it only applies to professionally represented actors, which I guess means that you have to have an actual lawyer by your side, and that it doesn't actually give you protection towards the whole using your voice for AI training thing, practically implying that this law wouldn't probably help voice actors all that much in the current scenario. That being said, according to Joe, he does not know any Hoyo contract that will allow them to use actors' voices for digital replica the way the law has specifically said it would. A point he brings up in relation to this was that the biggest reason there is for unionized projects is so that if they need legal representation against Hoyo or practically any other company in other situations, they would be able to use SAG's protection instead, in contrary of having to spend your own resources to defend yourself. This is something that should be obvious because that's what unions are usually for, to take the burden off the workers and protect them sufficiently, especially regarding to legal matters. This was never really a debate. From there on, however, his video went on from not only a kind of recount of facts, but also a recount of scenarios that are, in my opinion, really meant to steer people away from SAG's bullshit. Like sure, Hoyo can sign a union contract to end the CWR and get Ian voices back. Yes, we all know that. But then the problem is not with Hoyo to sign these things, but then to tell your union to give them a good deal that doesn't have any shifty stuff behind it. We already know that a union deal can end this. The issue is just make sure that the deal is actually strictly just to provide AI protection to these voice actors, instead of it being some sort of a spy hole that a union can use to better profit from certain projects. Joe brought up that Hoyo is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that definitely has the financial muscles and legal power to navigate a union contract. Then, pray tell, shouldn't that be all the more reason for us to believe that if Hoyo are not signing a contract meant to protect actors from AI, when they are already working with other studios that protect actors from AI, means that the problem with the agreement itself has nothing to do with the clauses that relate to AI, and they are instead finding problems on other different facets of the deal that is away from AI. And then he says that other Chinese companies have signed the union contracts in the past. Okay, then feel free to tell us which ones and let us know why those work, and why this one hasn't or didn't. He mentions this twice in the whole of the video, and in a video that's supposed to bring all the facts, he's not doing a good job presenting the whole image. I don't doubt that there are probably Chinese companies who have signed these kinds of deals before and currently, but we need all the information we can get from someone who's supposed to be a direct source in the situation. Which companies and how are their cases represented? I'm a media and comms graduate. If I made a video essay claiming something and then not providing or at least showcasing the direct sources that support those claims, then I wouldn't have been a graduate. Because it's that direct source that kind of matters more in this sort of claim, you know? And for those of you saying, oh, you should look for it yourself, that's kinda not how this works. You claim it, you gotta show it. It's that simple. Afterwards, a lot of the things that Joe states were then followed with supposed answers that rings around the tune of "it depends," such as the question of whether or not union actors will be replaced if Genshin goes union. He says that it is wildly ignorant to claim that, but then he follows it with an explanation of a thing in the US called right to work states. Right to work states is this rule that prevents unions from stopping non-union people residing within those states from working in projects. Not all US states have this law, yet afterwards he immediately shifts to Taft-Hartley's instead of explaining that LA, the city that a lot of voice actors are based in, including John Patnowat who was recently recasted, is not a right-to-work state. So if non-union actors are based in LA and wanted to work on union projects, SAG might very well have the right to prevent that. But instead of all that, what we get was him shifting to Taft-Hartley's, and you know what, that's alright, we can get into this now. He says that Taft-Hartley's are complicated, which for most of us looking at the situation from a neutral and semi-educated standpoint would have been an insanely obvious fact. Our problem, Joe, is that some of the vocal voice actors out there have always oversimplified this matter. Case in point, Poi Da was one of those examples, and there are many more. You can just see it from the tweets that they say in regards to these questions. Even Kyle McCarley, a widely recognized anime English dubber, doesn't answer when pressed further on the limitations of Taft-Hartley in his Reddit post. And quite frankly, Taft-Hartleys are only going to be a difficult thing if Genshin was to turn union. So you understand now why it seems like turning union makes the project become that much more of a headache to run, especially when things have been going just fine with the project being non-union. It's not us who are oversimplifying things, Joe. Your colleagues are the ones doing this. In fact, by saying, "Don't look too deep into this, it's confusing and it has nothing to do with SAG-AFTRA at all," you're kinda being part of the problem. I get that Joe was probably trying to say that SAG themselves has nothing to do with Taft-Hartley's because they aren't the ones to make or control the law itself, but it doesn't change the fact that SAG themselves are using Taft-Hartley protocols to sneak in this union requirement in their agreement clauses, which is the root of people's suspicions with SAG's motives to begin with. Showcasing all of these sources also points to that whole thing I said about showcasing the direct sources. So when I say that Taft-Hartley's only gives you 30 days of effective union employment, I had to dig up an archive from the Maryland Law Review to see if this thing is real. Cause fuck me, no other modern sites actually provide the direct source for this. It just sort of seems like an established rule out of thin air. PDF link in the description if you want to find it yourself, page 18. He then goes on to say that there are added layers of complexity in how Taft-Hartleys are triggered, waivers to sign if there are special exemptions, all things that makes trying to understand it even more jumbled up. And all of this just contributes to a much bigger point that a lot of players and fans in the community are now concluding for themselves. Joining SAG just sounds like a massive pain in the ass. Sure, you get legal protection, that's always a big plus. In fact, that's probably the biggest plus out of making Genshin a union project. But with all the justifications, all the ring around the rosies that you have to do to justify turning projects into a union project, it just makes it all sound like it's not worth the trouble, particularly for the people who are running the project in the first place. Much less for actors who don't want to join to begin with for whatever reason they may have, or the actors who can't even afford to join to begin with. Everything mentioned afterwards that relates to this concern also doesn't help to placate it. From the financial burden that you might incur by both being a member and also trying to be a member, the targets and milestones you need to get just to have basic healthcare from the union, the obscure rules you need to tread around, there's just so many more things to be wary about. Another thing that Karina said also jumps into the problems here. She says that you get paid better if you are in the union. Well, as it turns out, they were getting paid union rates even when they are not working a union project. Plus, sure, you can say that you get paid more, but then you have annual dues to worry about by being a member. And sure, you say that they can easily join the union, but what if they don't want to? Now that Joe has also mentioned that over 80% of voice acting jobs out there are non-union, at least I think he's talking about US only, wouldn't that mean that they are just limiting their job options and therefore also limiting the amount of work that they can comfortably take to begin with if they were to join the union? Of course, that is all because joining SAG also comes with the restrictions of not being allowed to do union work. At least, you know, on paper. Joe has also mentioned that there's this thing called working off the card where union actors take non-union jobs all the time and SAG just generally turn their head away from it. SAG-AFTRA's Global Rule 1 to me is about as stupid as piracy laws. What's the point of having a rule, especially your Global Rule 1, that can be broken anytime an actor wants and not have repercussions for it? Why have it in the first place? And to make matters more dubious, SAG's website heeds their actors to always assume that Global Rule 1 is always in place when they are coming up on a contract for a job or if they're behind a microphone or in front of a camera, and that the national board always has the rights to determine when its jurisdictions apply to the job. So that further raises the question, did someone from SAG authorize these actors to take the job by initially confirming that the Genshin job was alright to take? Or did the actors themselves, as we know it, simply ignore this rule on their lonesome? Joe himself recognizes that this is a hot topic because, as we know, these union actors took the job in Genshin, a non-union project. And a lot of us has been questioning if they broke SAG's own rule for that. And if they did, why is it that none of the repercussions that Joe mentioned in the video seem to have not applied to the offending Genshin actors? And why does it look like literally every other party involved are the ones to bear the consequences? Yet, instead of just outright saying that yes, they were breaking the rules and expanding on that, he pivoted to talks of FICOR or Financial Core, which basically is a quote-unquote SAG payment plan or something like that, I guess, that reduces your SAG benefits while also ensuring that you can still do non-union work as, I guess you're still somewhat of a paying SAG member. I don't know, the website is very wishy-washy. However, reduced SAG benefits just seem like such an understatement in regards to being FICOR. If you look at their website, the whole page is littered with reasons as to why you shouldn't go FICOR, and that you are forfeiting your SAG membership if you are to do so. Joe even brought the fact that SAG themselves still referred to FICOR non-members, I guess. I don't know how to refer to them here. Anyway, they still refer to these people as scabs, which, as we all probably should know, via the, drama between Jacob and Kaylee Mills and all that, is a term used to describe people who crossed the striking picket line and took work off of a striking worker. So, by default, they are calling someone like Risa May a scab, because she is FICOR. And like I said, the big benefit of being in a union like this is the legal protection, but FICOR members does not get that. Hell, from how I see it, if that's the way things are, I think you're just better off not associating yourself with FICOR in the first place with how much they try to steer you away from it. I'm not entirely sure why Joe brought this up as well, since it just sort of makes SAG look a lot more like pinheads. Joe himself could only say, which is strange to the fact that SAG still calls FICOR members as scabs, probably because if he were to express any further opinion, then he might find himself saying things that might not exactly align with the union standing. Of course, FICOR being looked down upon is also something that isn't new to us. Sean Chiplock, Deluxe VA, has mentioned this well over a year ago. He then goes on to speculate on whether or not a CWR will do anything to Hoyo's willingness to give actors AI protection. And he says that the evidence is not saying so. And to that, I just wanna ask, what do you mean by this? Again, a fact that these vocal actors never bring up, and I say never, is that Hoyo is working with other AI-protected studios. And we know this not because Hoyo was the one going, oh, I'm not against AI, I work with AI-protected studios. But it was the studios themselves who assure us that they have ample AI protection worked into every actor's contract in the studio. I don't doubt that you have evidence, yes, but what is it actually pointing to? Is it actually pointing to Hoyo not willing to give AI protection, or is it pointing to the notion that the deals SAG themselves have presented have serious flaws that could have detrimental prospects to Hoyo's ability to freely treat Genshin as a project going into the future, hence why they are not signing? The way I wanted to describe Joe's video, I can only best do so by utilizing a phrase in my native language, which is, Nangkong banget si bro. Don't use Google Translate for that, you'd get some words that really doesn't have anything to do with the expression. Also, fuck you Google, don't you dare suggest Malay stuff for my Indonesian language. It's like running 100 kilometers an hour head first towards a wall with the express interest of breaking free out of imprisonment, only to stop a millimeter away and not breaking anything out at all. He does so much to include or talk about the pain points yet did not provide any form of further clarification at all, which, this clarification is really what we ended up needing from the chaos of this situation. He doesn't even need to watch this video to look at people's questions. Just look at his own comment section. One person can be asking something like 10 questions on their lonesome, all of which have varying degree of great validity. He, just like Karina, though thankfully far more constructively, also pandered on the notion that we shouldn't trust the words of random people on the internet. And yeah, by all sense of logic, that is a very sound advice. We either go to X, Reddit, or YouTube, and we can never truly believe when someone claims something unless they have objective proof of it from reliable sources. But a lot of my own understanding on a lot of what other people have managed to find is based on not only the words and actions of other English VAs on the internet, but also from legal papers, official SAG AFTRA documents and website information, retelling of SAG member accounts who have said their pieces in their respective platforms, and now, more than ever, from videos that people like Joe have made. Discounting the opinions of the mass community that has researched the situation makes Joe's videos seem a bit out of touch with how the community is currently paying attention to the situation. Because I can guarantee you, I'm fairly confident of this, watch my earlier video on this matter, and you would soon find that 90% of the understanding that I've already formed in that video is in line with what Joe ends up basically confirming and summing up in his video. So it is to say that Joe himself seems to be out of the loop with what the community is actually trying to understand and what they have understood. We know about the fight against AI. We know about how Hoyo could sign a union contract and this could all be dealt with. But what we also know is that SAG hasn't exactly been forthcoming with their motives as seen from their own official documents. The VAs are oversimplifying vital union processes that obscures the true nature of how restrictive and shifty SAG can be, a notion that other voice actors in the industry has confirmed, and that the deal that SAG presents is not one that companies can outright sign with the right conscience in regards to their own projects. Of course, it goes without saying that just because I'm seemingly defending Hoyo, it doesn't mean that I want AI to replace voice actors. I don't want performative work to ever be replaced with AI, any kind of performative work. That being said, I also don't want Hoyo to sign a deal that might restrict their creative direction going into the future. What's the point of signing something to make sure that voice actors can't get replaced by machines, only to then be potentially limited from accessing the whole wealth of talent that non-union voice actors may have left to be discovered? It's just so extremely counterintuitive. Do I think that Joe's video as a whole was a wash? Well, no, not really, because at the end of the day, I still have to be thankful that he still took the time to make it. Because compared to what some of his fellow Genshin VAs are doing, making this kind of video, regardless of its shortcomings, is still a better tiny bit of light shed onto the situation. So once again, thank you, Joe. We appreciate you coming around telling us and confirming all these little pieces of knowledge that some of us have held. Still, it does not excuse the fact that it did fall way short of what people were actually looking for at this present moment. And now, more people are becoming increasingly more fed up with how the vocal voice actors are acting up. What I think people really wanted was for that video to just directly address, or even, if he found it to be necessary, call out the individuals and parties that have been causing all this chaos in the first place. I didn't even bring up the fact that Joe started his video by saying that we all lost our shared humanity over a gacha game. Again, for a video aiming to only bring facts, that is not something factual to say. Far from it. He doesn't even address that particular thought throughout the entirety of his video, so I'm not even sure why he said that in the first place. Same thing can be said about SAG. For a seemingly professional union, they are doing some very unprofessional stuff by straight up calling Hoyo out in their tweets when Hoyo shouldn't be the ones that they are dealing with. People have pretty much gotten their patience ran off the rails, and they are starting to really showcase their vocal disdain for how this situation is turning out. Some even calling for the complete recast of the Union EN VAs. Do I really think that recasting the English VAs is really the best way to move forward? Well, no, not at all. At the very least from a creative direction standpoint, much less from like contracts and all that stuff. But even I have to admit that some of these VAs have really made it extremely difficult for players to really warm up to them and welcome their voice back if they do return. And now that the CN player base have gotten themselves involved, I'm starting to really doubt the future of some of these English voices. Like I implied in my last video, when the Chinese does China things, they get really China. They're literally not gonna stop pushing until they see an action that somewhat resembles the change that they are looking for. Some of them even saying that they will buy the Welcome Pass for a year straight if the troublesome VAs get recasted. Which is, well, an intriguing form of persuasion to say the least. Anyway, before I end this video, I want to briefly touch upon something I said in my previous video that may require an apology and clarification of its own. So, in my last video, I mentioned without reservation that John Patwad, Kenichi's old English VA that got recasted, was a non-union voice actor, meaning that he is not affiliated with SAG-AFTRA, at least not in a full membership capacity. However, someone in that video's comments brought up the information that his resume, the one you can find and publicly download from his voice acting agency, states, well, it doesn't outright states that he is a SAG-AFTRA member, but it does have a simple SAG-AFTRA line written at near of the head of the resume. Now, while some of you might not immediately conclude that this means he is SAG affiliated, as someone who kind of hates uncertainty, I'd rather stay on the side of caution and apologize for this oversight in my part of the research, because this really should have been something I addressed considering all the other information I'd found. Of course, this does open a whole lot of other can of worms that can lead to questions such as, if he was SAG affiliated, then why frame his recast statement in a way that makes it look like he was non-union? Why didn't he just call out Hoyo for recasting a union VA when it is supposedly illegal, at least considering our previous understanding of the situation? And it goes back to our whole question about what rights Hoyo has. But these are things we can save, I don't know, I guess for another time, or you guys can just talk about it in the comments. I don't know, but I did try to reach out to John via his agency email to see if I can get a better purview into this, but I've gotten no reply so far. Bottom line is, I'm sorry, and I should have found this sooner. And thank you Cinderhawk8407 for bringing his resume, for bringing his resume up for me to check. English is not my first language. Anyway, to go back and conclude this thing, it depends is not a good enough answer. We know that it was an it depends kind of thing to begin with. The question and answer we were looking for is to see which branch of the situation are we supposed to be looking at in specificity to Hoyo right now. Is it the type of it depends that means Hoyo has to pick up their slack and sign an agreement? Or is it the type of it depends that showcases that SAG needs to get their shit together, make a better deal, and that voice actors need to either speak up or shut up? Because unfortunately for the union and voice actors, with more and more official information popping up and with more and more perspectives piling into this problem, it's looking a whole lot more like people are more willing to presume the latter. It also doesn't help that, apparently, according to Kyle McCarley, SAG has like 4 underpaid staff members that handles their communications department, which, you know, supposedly for a union that had their CEO earn over $1 million just last year, is quite a weird, I guess, notion to just put out there. Looks like we're not getting any updates on their website, nor any meaningful updates from SAG themselves with that kind of force behind it. And that's about all that I have for this video. Thanks for coming by and giving this update a watch. Hopefully the next time I make something that relates to this topic, it'll be to finally conclude it once and for all, instead of it trying to re-clarify things that seems to just get confused upon over and over again. But then again, I'm a YouTuber, so I guess according to Karina, I'm just a liar, so you probably shouldn't listen to me.
YouTubers don't know anything. Stop telling me to go to liars.
Funnily enough, you know, a lot of people use this joke in Joe's video as well, because he technically counts as a YouTuber too. He has way more total views and videos than I do, so I guess by Karina's standards, he's a liar too. And look, fun little Easter egg from Joe's video. The top comment that is just below the pinned comment is actually a quote that I made in my own video. In their quest to not get replaced by AI, they seem to have completely forgotten that actual people can still replace them. I can see someone has been taking inspiration from me. Thank you for watching. Hope you guys found this useful, and feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you guys next time. Sayonara.